Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Can You Hear Me, now known as Can You See Me podcast. And I've got an absolute belter for you today. We're talking communications, and more importantly, the power of language. And I've got some absolute experts with me today. I'm going to start with an absolute legend who has been a real influence behind the Race Equality Network, the Root Out Racism campaign, and just all-round guru when it comes to advocating for positive change. I am, of course, talking about Shak Rafiq. Shak, welcome. Do you want to just say a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Fatima. So hello and assalamu alaikum. We're recording this episode during Islamophobia Awareness Month, so it's important for me to greet you in that way. Hello, my name is Shak, and I lead on communications and involvement for the Bradford District and Craven Health and Care Partnership. And then broader than that, where do I live? I live in Leeds. I'm a Liverpool fan. I have to get that in every time.
Oh, mate, why did you go there? Why did you
I know. And I'm a father of 4 children of varying ages. One who I no longer describe as a child, who's pretty much an adult now, and 3 younger children.
Oh, well, thanks for taking the time to join us today, Shak. It's a very busy time for comms. I mean, it's always a busy time for comms, but particularly at the moment. Our second panelist is someone who is personally and professionally really important to me. We do go way back, but she's also one of the most influential allies that I know working on the agenda of not just race equality, but gender equality and inclusion. She's also a multi-award-winning comms professional. Karen Coleman, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself? I mean, most of us know you in West Yorkshire, but obviously you've got a reputation nationally for being really influential in the world of comms. And for people that haven't come across the work that you've done before, just fill them in because they might have been under a rock somewhere.
Oh, thank you, and lovely to be here with you, Fatima, and equally my friend and colleague Shak too. Humbled by that, thank you. I don't absolutely think that I live up to that or deserve that, but thank you very much. So communications to me is a passion. Women's agenda is a passion. Equality, fairness, and diversity is something that I hold very close to my heart. And without all the help I would have got over the years about what's the right terminology when I do my communications from colleagues who've always been approachable and have helped me get some of that conversation right. A huge thank you to them. A little bit about me. So I've been in communications over 33 years. I know I don't look old enough, but I am. And also I've worked for the International Welfare of the Red Cross. My job there was actually a fascinating job. I worked on communications for missing people separated by conflict, natural disaster, and war, and yeah, so whenever I see the news, that reminds me of some of my past communication work. In terms of the West Yorkshire Partnership, I've worked here on communication involvement engagement for over 7 years now. So I worked when we were sticky toffee puddings, for those who remember the old STPs, and then when we became an integrated care system. But the thing I'm most proud of is that I work for West Yorkshire Healthcare Partnership, and that includes a network of over 200 communication engagement colleagues working across all public sector services, and also importantly the voluntary community sector, as well as areas such as Health Watch. So there's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Kaz. That's really great. The Health and Care Partnership that we all support covers a geography of 2.4 million people, which is huge, really diverse, really complicated, which is why effective communications is so important. And the basis of why we decided to do this podcast together was based on a report that came out from the Race Health Observatory, where there was an exploration of the terminology of BAME, which for those of you that don't know the acronym, it means Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic, and about the impact that language has on individuals, particularly that term. And I suppose what I wanted to explore with you both, and I'll come to you first, Shak, is does language matter? Does terminology matter? And what did you think of the report itself, in particular, its recommendation to really focus on naming communities when we're talking about engaging with our diverse communities?
Language absolutely matters, and so do values. So when you're talking about doing communications on behalf of different and diverse communities, some that you may be part of, some that you're not directly part of, you have a responsibility to get it right, and to get it right in a way that doesn't create and encourage a greater level of stereotyping and bias. So it's really important that we not only get the language right, but we consider the needs of those communities, more specifically around this report. There's a couple of things. One, when I introduced myself, I said I'm Muslim, but I'm a Muslim in my own right. I can only represent myself. So my job as a communicator is to bring my lived experience, but also say I get it wrong sometimes, and I get it wrong sometimes. I can give an example. I have organised events on a Friday afternoon, not thinking about Friday prayer because I'm not a regular to the mosque on a Friday afternoon. So I will make those mistakes. I can get things right, and my job is to support people to understand what it feels like to be a Muslim and guide colleagues and understand what terminology would be acceptable to the widest group of people, and then understand the intersectionality issues. So we're more than one personality and more than one protected characteristic at any one time. So for me, it's important that I talk about people and in a way that they want to be spoken about. So I'm a Muslim, I'm from a South Asian background, but I'm very proud to be British. That's my personality. And when someone writes a piece of communication towards me, that's what it should be looking to address. But I accept that that's not going to be possible for every piece of communication. Then what I would want to see is words that are backed up by actions that show that you treat me as a human in my own right. And the fact that I'm of a South Asian background, it's important, but shouldn't be the only thing that defines me. So in a nutshell, that's where I am. In terms of the report, I think it's a really positive step in the right direction, because I've long campaigned for using the word ethnically diverse and then describing people as they wish to be described. So that's where I am on this.
Yeah, I mean, you covered so much in what you've just said, and we are going to come back to intersectionality because it's an ongoing theme throughout all our podcasts. But what you've also mentioned is something that I remember when we were doing the review, Karen, we discussed a lot about terminology, about language, about what definition and term we utilise to, define what is a very diverse and vibrant community. Do you want to just share a little bit about how we came to the conclusion of the content and language that we use within the report itself? And the independent review, for folks that haven't seen it, is a review into the impacts of health inequalities, impact on our communities and staff. And Karen was instrumental in developing that report with the report team. But yeah, Karen, over to you.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd like to say is good intention isn't enough. I think when you're a communication person or whatever your role is, wherever you work in a public sector service or in business, if you like, I think to write with good intention and goodwill isn't enough. So I think when I start to write information, I always check it out with my colleagues, and I say to them, "Am I getting this right?" Because I don't know what it's like to walk the shoes that they walk in. I can only speak from my personal perspective, just like what Shak's raised, really. So when we were doing the review, we did a lot of sound checking on that, didn't we? We did a lot, especially around the anti-racism movement, which was part of that review, one of the recommendations that came out. And that's why it was really super important that that movement was actually led by colleagues who live in their communities, who know what it feels like to be them, really. And even then, we can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I think it's a better way to do things rather than act with goodwill or good intention. And I think what the review found, and I think we were halfway through writing the report, weren't we, Fatima, and doing all the filming with some brilliant voluntary community sector organisations and groups who were very much part of that review, is that then there was seemed to be a conversation coming out from national colleagues around the use of the term BAME. And that we'd already, with the help of Dame Donna Kinnair, we'd already agreed that it would be a BAME review, really. So even when you're seeking advice and you're seeking clarification, I think often it depends on what platform you're speaking from or what experience you're talking about. And so even then we had this bit of to and from, do we stick with the word BAME or do we move from the word BAME? But I actually endorse, what Shak said, is that when I write, I talk about minority communities, because in that way, then hopefully we're not disrespecting the communities that we miss.
Yeah. And I think, sort of going back to what you were saying, Shak, that the terminology, I think, links to this feeling of power. So if you put everybody in a homogenous group, you're just defining them as a smaller collective, and the power dynamic shifts, which is why I think it's triggering for people. I also think, and you and I have shared many conversations about our journeys to fulfill what we believe our identity is. And you mentioned intersectionality, and we're not one homogenous group. We're not even one homogenous group of protected characteristics, are we? And our identities are really important to us. They don't just stop the moment we walked into an organisation or a building, they remain with us. So therefore, being defined as part of a group of lots of people that may be very, very different to us sometimes triggers a reaction, which I think is completely understandable, and kind of what Karen was alluding to as part of the conversation. I suppose the final thing that I wanted to reflect on, and again, I'm going to come back to you, Karen, first, is, while I fully appreciate that language can trigger people, and we've agreed as a health and care partnership what language we want to use. So, for example, the Strategic Race Equality Network has gone for ethnically diverse communities because that's what the network agreed on. Do you think we're ever going to get to a space where everyone's going to agree on the same terminology? Just with your effective knowledge? No. Yeah, I didn't think so either. Like, you're not going to please everyone, are you?
No, and in my experience of communications, no, we're not. And it changes all the time, which I think is really unhelpful. But then I think it's an evolving area of work that we need to keep permanently plugged into. I think the interesting thing as well is we talk about intersectionality and we talk about people's life journeys. I remember being a single mum in the 80s. We were splattered all over.
She don't look it though, folks. She don't look it, but she was.
But we were splattered all over the front page that we were stereotyped as wanting to have babies because we wanted a council house. That was why. If we were a single mum, there was a lot of teenage pregnancies, much more teenage pregnancies around than what we've got now. But I was stereotyped as being a single mum because I wanted benefits and I wanted to live in a council house. Now, I also remember people being stereotyped for smoking then when they were single parents. It was really pressurized on single parents at that time. So I think really it's this, it evolves, doesn't it? The stereotypical views evolves. But I think what doesn't unfortunately evolve is racism. And we're still experiencing racism and discrimination. And whether the terminology, we try our best to get that right, that doesn't change things. We still experience racism and discrimination on too many levels, where there's not an acceptance of everybody brings something to their own community or society. And that's the thing that saddens me the most.
I mean, it's really interesting what you say about stereotypes, and we're going to come back to intersectionality and some of the work you've been doing to support the women's movement. But I just want to go back to the root out racism stuff and the link to stereotypes. So I think one of the reasons why the Root Out Racism campaign, which of course is multi-award winning and reached over 600 organisations in West Yorkshire and beyond, was successful was because it challenged the stereotypes, and it started a conversation about how racism is much more subtle than people fully appreciate. I mean, depending on what media outlets you go to, it's a little bit more overt, but generally within society, it is a little bit more covert and subtle. Shak, I'm going to come to you first because you were involved in the campaign. In fact, you were one of the faces of the campaign, if I remember correctly. What were your sort of thoughts? Because it was a really, I thought, an emotive exercise where Karen and colleagues did a listening exercise, lived experience engagement process where people were able to share their stories of racism, and within that, some of the stereotypes that I think people sometimes perceived. Do you want to just share a little bit of your experience of that?
Yeah, certainly, Fatima. And I think this goes back to that point around intent, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So when we talk about our work and we communicate effectively, it might come from good intent, but what's the behaviours we see on the ground and how do we address those? So this movement and this campaign was about addressing those actual issues that happen to people on a daily basis. And how do you amplify that and share that and show people, hold up a mirror, and it'll be a very unwelcome mirror as to the experiences of people from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And for me, that was really important. And I think going back on a point that Karen made earlier about it's not always easy to get the terminology right. We know even through that movement and the campaign messaging, there were times where people challenged us on the approach we took, and it was important to listen to diverse views and help people understand the approach we took. So whilst it was the right one for us and it's proven effective, nonetheless, again, we are diverse people, irrespective of which group or groups you might identify with, which means that you might not always be aligned. So our job was to create something that as many people could understand and get behind. So for me, that's where as a communicator, if I think about that movement and the learning from that you take into other spaces, is what do you do when you get it wrong, especially when the intent was the right one? And that's really important, both as an organization to reflect your values and then your communications in response to when you get it wrong. So the movement was brilliant. We had an issue where people felt that it wasn't reflective or wasn't as empowering as others felt it would be, and we responded and reacted and brought people on that journey with us. So that, and then allows us to be flexible in our future approach to both that movement and future campaigns, because there's always learning in everything we do every single day.
I mean, again, so much in what you just said, but I think one of the things that is really important to acknowledge was that the lived experience and listening exercise did encourage and support an approach that had the juxtaposition of positive narrative and the visuals that were used in the campaign. And while some individuals understandably were triggered by some of those visuals, in the main, the campaign really resonated and impacted with people. And I think we need to, whenever you're doing any campaign, and Karen, you know this more than I do, the evaluation has to look at both the advantages and opportunities and impact positive that it's made, but also learn from some of the areas where it could have been strengthened. But no campaign, I don't think, while necessarily being provocative to stimulate debate, will not upset someone. I mean, I think that's just nigh on impossible, isn't it? But Karen, before you talk about some of the sort of feedback and learning from the campaign, I really want to hear from you as someone who, you know, has shared very much your own heritage and relationship with the race agenda, but also led the listening exercise. You developed the lived experience report. And I think some of the content of that report is really important for people to hear, because then it explains why the campaign took the route that it did.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things really around what Shak and yourself were saying there, is that any sensitive issue is a difficult project to take on. So does that mean we avoid it?
Exactly.
No, we don't avoid it, do we? What we do is we try our absolute best to work with people who can advise us in their expertise on their personal experiences. So any sensitive campaign I've ever taken part of, and another one I'm really proud was around domestic abuse and forced marriage. And I worked really closely with local councillors and a massive team around that work, and that was a big national award winner as well. And we had difficult conversations around that, and like we did with our anti-racism movement. You find that the most powerful are sometimes the most difficult journeys to get over to the completion line, if you like, or the start of that campaign. So in terms of some of the things that I'll always remember really around that, and where my heart even now still breaks, is when we were listening to some of the people's experiences. I remember one colleague talking about how they went onto a bus, the person in front, the bus driver gave them the change in the hand. For them, they put it in the tray. And then also saying this thing as a grandmother of mixed race grandchildren, saying that racism started the day I was born. I just think, what hope is there for my grandchildren? So some of this, absolutely, if you're a good human being, it really resonates deep, doesn't it, into everything you do. And I'll always remember, always be grateful, and always feel privileged to have worked for people who put their bravery and courage on the line. For example, Shak, to put his face on the back of a bus. Would I want my face on the back of a bus talking about such a sensitive issue?
He looked good though.
I'm not convinced. And there was about 12 colleagues who did that, and also then people who allowed us, with their permission, to use their quotes throughout the campaign. Them quotes were real life experiences to them, and I think we should never take that for granted, how much energy and worth that means to people. And as communication people, we've got a duty to get that across in a compassionate, caring way.
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, I think we need to use this opportunity and this platform to say a huge thank you to everybody who contributed to that campaign, either sharing their lived experience, the quotes, and of course the images, of which Shak is literally the face of. But also, I think there is a couple of layers that in there that I think is really important to acknowledge. One is the power of allyship. And yes, you have got emotional and familial connections to the agenda, but it takes great courage to stand at the forefront and advocate for equality with such risk as a campaign like this. I think we need to acknowledge that, Karen. I think the other thing that people always sort of sometimes mention but don't fully appreciate is when you're advocating for equality, it comes with personal and professional risk. So to put your face on a bus comes with massive risk. I mean, that's like the extreme iteration. But just being part of the conversation, advocating for the campaign, I think, you know, takes such courage. And I take my hat off, if I had one, to all the people that contributed and learned. I mean, we did an evaluation, and I remember when we were pitching for the HSG, and it was the three of us that went in to pitch for it. We were talking about the evaluation, weren't we, Shak, and some of the reach and some of the feedback that we had from colleagues. Do you want to just share a little bit about some of the things that stood out for you in particular? And I still have that image in my mind of Centenary Square in Bradford, and the visuals were just so inspiring, weren't they?
Thanks, Fatima. I think Karen's probably got the figures to hand, so I don't do numbers very well. I do words better.
No, it's more the words.
But from me, from an evaluation perspective, what really stood out for me, and something that we said at that panel, was the bravery it took for us all to not just participate in that movement, but for people to sign this off.
Yeah.
And that's strong leadership in its own right. And it's important to reflect that and acknowledge that. But what it signaled was you as an individual, irrespective of your background, in our partnership, have a voice, and you can use it for the greater good, and to share your experiences to start movements like this and make a change that will benefit yourself, because we all think about ourselves, there's nothing wrong with that, but your families, your friends, and your communities. And that for me was an unintended consequence that we probably didn't think at the time, but actually it's given people a chance to talk about issues that previously they would have shied away from. So I think the movements are not a campaign, but the actual movement part of it, that's what it's led to. And I'm extremely proud of colleagues who shared some really tough experiences. Mine wasn't tough. Mine was just easy, just have your picture taken and tell us what's going on. But some of the stories, as Karen has alluded to, were really, really emotionally challenging and charged. So for people to share those openly, and then to have some words to go with their photo, takes an element of bravery. But they now know, and I hope other colleagues know, that we've got a partnership that'll take things seriously. And I think for me, from an evaluation perspective, that's the bit that doesn't necessarily get picked up in some of the awards, but it's actually one of the critical success factors.
Yeah, and the stories, I mean, we hear about them very frequently in our networks about how the campaign stimulated individuals to have conversations they would never have had if that campaign had not been instigated. And I remember, Karen, that, you know, there was so much effort that you and the team put into in regards to the images, because people don't appreciate just how finesse to skill comms is. You know, the visuals, the lettering, the language, the communications channels, the preparation, the lining stuff up, the launch, the assets. It's no small thing. I mean, people think nowadays, because of the whole video logging space, that it's actually quite easy to pull off a campaign like this, especially on a geography as big as ours, but it wasn't, was it? I mean, he's still getting nightmares from some of the stuff we have to deal with.
I think what's helpful really, and I know Shak will understand this, you know, people have some wonderful ideas, inspiring initiatives they want to get off the ground, and they'll say, and you know, and we'll say as communication people, and we might be at the 1st of January, when do you want to launch it, or the 1st of February, or second week of January, and we think, that ain't happening, really, because I think it is a profession, Fatima, and thank you for recognizing that. We work with some highly trained, skilled people, and campaign planning, movement planning, communication planning, involvement activities, whatever that might be. You know, there's a lot to it to try and get it into the best shape possible that we can for our colleagues and our communities. And I think just to recognise really that we don't just sprinkle a bit of magic or put a bit of sparkle just on something.
But you do that as well.
We try to put a lot of thought and energy into what we do, and we can't do it on our own. We have to work with our colleagues who are professionals, who are skilled in digital, like our Ben or whatever that might be. There's a lot more to it, I think, than one point people probably recognise.
No, and I think one of the reasons why this podcast is really important to me personally is I think sometimes our comms colleagues are our invisible heroes where, you know, they're always there behind the scenes making things a reality, but they don't often have the space to be visible and to be celebrated. And I hope that this stimulates a conversation where we really value our comms colleagues, because nothing would get done without them, quite frankly. And, you know, it's a really helpful segue, I suppose, to the other element that I wanted to explore with you both. And Shak, you started off with this, which was when you described yourself, you described the different facets that made you Shak Rafiq. Yeah, so you're not just a man from an ethnically diverse background with children who happens to have a faith. There are different facets that make you your unique person. And I suppose, you know, one of the reasons why I asked you to be a part of this podcast was that your values and the uniqueness that makes you who you are comes through in your comms and on the areas in which you wanted to focus. And I wanted to explore with you, I mean, you mentioned yourself the importance of Islamophobia Awareness Month. You introduced yourself by saying peace be with you, which is the Arabic greeting for Muslims. How important is it to have visible role models of your heritage leading on some of the comms campaigns? And how has being a role model, because you are a role model and leader in the space, enabled you to support others?
Thanks for a really challenging question there, Fatima. I was hoping you got to Karen first there, but
good. So said your name, my friend.
There's two things for me. So in terms of having role models, you can only be what you see. And when we talk about me as an individual, what's really important to me, as well as my ethnic and religious identity, is my socio-economic identity. I come from working class roots. My dad was a factory worker. My mum was a housewife. Even to this day, 40 odd years in this country, doesn't really speak English. So I know what it's like to experience all those things. So when I talk about role models, they don't necessarily have to be necessarily of the same ethnicity. If I've got a working class person in a leadership position, that's as important, if not more important sometimes, than seeing someone of the same heritage as me. So for me, we must continue to strive to get the right people into those places with the right skills so they can hold their own around some of the decision-making tables. So, and on a personal level, I like the fact that you describe me as a role model. I don't see myself as that. I see myself as being someone who's here to make a change. So when you ask me to introduce myself, I've got a job title, but in this space and in the work I do, it's not important. It just defines my professional occupation. But my job is to create an environment where we do things for the greater good, except that we might get things wrong. And if I can represent in my own small way some of the communities who may not be around that decision-making table, how do I do it? And how do I do it effectively so that people can come on that journey with me so we make that change together? So that's what drives me. It's making a real difference, reducing those inequalities and creating a fairer world for all. I mean, who doesn't want that? And I think if I think about role modeling, it's sometimes being the person that has to say something on behalf of others because you know others are thinking it. And that might mean you stand alone and it might be really awkward and it could be quite scary and challenging. So I feel a responsibility at that point to get it right when I am about to say something that I think is on behalf of a group of people, and also the fact that people might think I'm a representative of whichever community they think I'm a representative of.
I mean, I think one of the things I really admire about communications professionals, and they are a profession, Karen is right, it's a really skilled job, is that you have to speak truth to power. You are the person that goes, I'm not sure this is the best way forward. And you're saying that from a really skilled and expert perspective. But there are also times when you have to speak truth to power, Shak, as you've described. And the reason why you are a role model is because you are somebody who's very visible on the agenda. You're in a position of influence with the comms agenda, and those things matter. And you will, you know, you are a leader in your own right. So role model is absolutely justified. I think one of the things that always sort of stays with me is communications are such an effective enabler when it comes to equality. So if you think about COVID and when we were in those really dark times of trying to find a way out and getting people vaccinated, and people understandably were wary, the role that you all played in those effective communications of finding those trusted influencers, of getting those right messages, was instrumental in the success of people being able to come out of COVID. So there are many, I mean, I could be here all day, but we've not got time on the podcast to share all the examples. But I think your nuanced insight into understanding the lived experience of those communities, your contacts, being able to define and develop materials that spoke and were relevant to those nuanced communities is crucial to your success, and one of the reasons why you're so good at what you do. Karen, I want to come back to you because there were a couple of things that you said that really, I mean, everything you said resonates with me, but in particular, there were two things. One is, I think you and Shak are both the embodiment of where you start doesn't mean that's where you're going to end up, because you are both the embodiment of intersectionality and social mobility being a part of that. The other thing that you said, and you know, it's heartbreaking, some of the stories that we still hear from our children and young people about equality and their lived experience, was that prejudice or bias is something that is not inherent. You're not born with it, it's learned because society is unequal. And there was a video, I don't know whether you colleagues have seen it, of the two dolls, of the doll that is sort of a white heritage and another one that is of a sort of a black heritage. And they ask the question of which one's pretty, which one's ugly, which one's good, which one's bad. These are young children making these judgments. And, you know, it's absolutely soul destroying. But part of that is the conditioning and learning of society and what they see. I hope in a post George Floyd world that that's changing. And the reason why I think it's changing is because of the campaigns that you and Shak have done, Karen, with the Root Out Racism, the role modelling campaign, the leadership blogs, where you give a platform to people of lots of different heritages to showcase not only their leadership, but also their heritage and share really personal stories. But you also shared your own journey of how your lived experience makes you the leader that you are and a role model in West Yorkshire. You are people that are inspired by the work that you do, that you've shared your story with and you've given hope to because of your lived experience of being a single parent that has lived with domestic violence, that has enabled yourself to travel to some of the highest influencing forums, not regionally, but nationally on the comms agenda. I suppose the question that I want to ask you through all of that is, if I was to speak to Karen Coleman maybe 20 years ago, what advice would you give to people, particularly young women who are experiencing inequality and don't think it's possible?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. If I look back at my younger self, would I have dreamed I would have done this job? I'm sure I'm like Shak, no, I wouldn't. And for different reasons to Shak, but no, I wouldn't. Did I have aspirations? Yes, I did. Did I see myself as vulnerable? No, I didn't. I saw myself as determined and motivated. And I think I owe it. I owe whatever tiny experience I've had, and it is tiny. It's not as traumatic as a lot of my other friends or colleagues in my life. I owe it to send that escalator back down, you know, to bring other women. And I know we're talking about lots of things, but in particular right now about women, is to help them know that there's a way out of that. That this isn't another cycle of abuse, another generation that has to go through the same. And I've had some, you know, shocking things when I look back. And my son doesn't forgive. You know, my son is a true woman's ally. You know, I've had some shocking things when my son was 4. I used to go and watch him play football. And nobody would talk to me, Fatima, because I was the only single mum stood on the playing field. I've had people when I was doing some jobs. I used to be working a casino in London. You know, my friend used to have my son 3 nights a week just so I could stay off benefits. And I worked in a Piccadilly casino. And I heard somebody one night say there was. I don't mean this arrogantly, but they were saying, "Oh, I'm going to ask her out," sort of thing. "Oh, you don't want to go near her, mate. She's got kids." You know, like you're either a single parent or you're not. But yet, when I look at and I talk about all my work, Fatima, the things that I'm most proud of in my life, you know, at 58, is that I was a single mum. You know, I'm very proud that I brought my children up to be really good people who were very kind. And that's the thing I probably bring into my work more than anything else, is kindness and trying to be compassionate. I know I probably get it wrong. Trying to help others who are in my situation, because I know what that feels like. You know, getting your kids into bed and nobody to talk to. Your weekends are long because you've just got the kids all weekend. You can't afford to take them out anywhere. You know, it's really so that's what I try to bring in. And so when I've worked alongside, you know, I've worked alongside other women, you know, I've had the very privileged position of mentoring them. But equally, I could give you 3 women's names who've lifted me up and said to me, you know, when I was cleaning, I'm very proud. I was a cleaner alongside working as a groupie, you know, in my late teens. When one of them said to me, "What are you doing?" And I says, "I'm just going to hoover." She says, "No, Karen, what are you doing? What are you doing this?" You know, and Linda was one of my first big inspirations, and other women who have took me on their journey and took me with them as they've risen and in an organisation, and they're the things that matter to me.
And I think, I mean, firstly, you know, how incredible is that story? You know, and I'm a genuine believer that West Yorkshire is a place that no matter where you come from, you can fulfill your potential. Just this conversation shows us that. But it also amplifies the fact that when you engage with people within the workplace, you have no idea what's going on in their lives. Which is why it's so important to create psychologically safe environments for people to connect and support each other. Because like you, I've had many people support me on my journey. I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for that. But what you've also described, and you are one of the proud founders of the Staff Women's Network within the Health and Care Partnership. And it's a fantastic network which is growing from strength to strength under your leadership and Susie's leadership and Amrit's leadership. And Shak, you were one of the founding members of the Race Equality Network here in West Yorkshire as well. So networks are crucial to creating forums and connections that support people to be really good at their job, but also supports them on their journey in life, really. So, I mean, we could talk for all day, but I think one of the things that is really important and I've learned from this conversation is that comms is incredible. You are people that are working like invisible superheroes every single day, not only supporting the work of the Health and Care Partnership, but with societal issues and societal injustice. And we're very grateful for the work that you do, and that despite the best intentions, sometimes, although emotive, language isn't always right, but we're a learning organisation that continues to learn despite that. There's also some examples of fantastic work and more work to come, because Root Out Racism Phase 2 is coming, isn't it, Karen? Watch this space. But also the fact that actually as comms professionals, your lived experience has really shaped and influenced your journeys into the workplace. And I'm so grateful that you've shared so much of yourselves with us on this journey. And I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm just gutted we can't do it all day, but we might have to come back to it another time, folks. Let us know what you think. But for now, I just want to thank Shak and Karen for their time.
Yeah.
And
can I just give a big shout out?
Of course you can.
So I just want to give a big shout out really to all our communication and involvement engagement colleagues that we work with across West Yorkshire. We've got a fantastic network, and I think we've got one of the strongest, haven't we, Shak, in the country, where we can make things happen when we all come together for a common cause. And I think anything that me and Shak's do isn't necessarily our work. It's because we work with some amazing colleagues to help make it happen.
Absolutely. And Shak, is there anybody that you'd like to give a shout out to apart from the best comms and engagement networking in the country, in my opinion?
Well, I was going to give a shout out to yourself and Karen first and foremost for all the work that you do, because it's easy to think about everyone else I could give a shout out to who's not on this call. But let's start with the colleagues on the call and for your support that you show me and allow me to challenge where I need to challenge. And we started about language, and language is how important it is, but sometimes it's not easy when you come from your lived experience. Your language is defined by where you've come from, so sometimes getting around that decision making table can be quite challenging. So absolutely. I want to thank you for your time, and sometimes language for me personally might not be spot on because you worked hard to get to that space and then you're still struggling. But beyond that, I don't want to mention names because then it gets a bit tricky because there'll be someone who will forget. But I just want to thank all the, not just the leaders, but my peers and others who have mentored me or reverse mentored me, because actually it's the cumulative effect of everyone's stories that makes me a better me and helps me understand my blind spots. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Shak. I mean, what a powerful way to end this conversation. You know, this isn't just about the fact that we've been on a journey together and the job is tough. it's about the power of collaboration and working in partnership and how we can support each other to get to where we need to go. What a fantastic way to end this podcast. Thank you both for your time.
Pleasure.
And thanks for watching.